What if death isn't the end, but a doorway? Imagine finding an ancient manual, not just for dying well, but for living fully. A text so powerful that the Beatles, scientists, and hospice centers worldwide use its wisdom. This isn't fiction. This 1,200-year-old Tibetan manuscript was deliberately hidden for centuries, waiting for us. The Tibetan Book of the Dead. They call it the Bardo Thödol, liberation through hearing. Today I'll show you why this death manual might be life's most practical guide. Stay with me to discover the hidden architecture of your own mind. The Tibetan Book of the Dead isn't just another religious text, it's a precise map of consciousness, revealing how your mind works during both life's transitions and death itself. I'm not just fascinated by its afterlife descriptions, but how it illuminates the transitions we navigate every single day. Those moments between anger and calm, between sleeping and waking, between one identity and another. The Tibetan tradition calls these Bardos, and mastering them might be the key to freedom. For centuries, this wisdom was reserved for monastics and the dying. Now, scientists, psychologists, and everyday people are discovering its remarkable applications for living. I've spent a lot of time studying this text, and what I've found will change how you experience everything. You're in a Bardo right now. Bardo simply means in-between state, those transitions from one experience to another. They're not just for death. They're happening throughout your life. The word comes from Tibetan. Bar means in between, and do means suspended or thrown. We're constantly moving through these transitions, whether we notice them or not. The Tibetan Book of the Dead describes 6 Bardos. The first 3 happen during life. The Bardo of life, your ordinary waking consciousness from birth until death. This is what you're experiencing right now, watching this video, thinking about these concepts, feeling curious or skeptical. The Bardo of dreams, your consciousness during sleep and dreaming. This happens when you drift off tonight, those vivid dreams of flying, anxiety dreams about being unprepared, or strange moments when you become aware you're dreaming. The Bardo of meditation, the shifts in awareness during deep contemplation. This happens when thoughts dissolve during meditation, when boundaries between yourself and the world soften, when you experience sudden clarity after confusion. The next 3 happen during and after death, the Bardo of dying, the moment of death transition. This begins with the dissolution of elements during the dying process and culminates in what the text describes as the clear light of death, when all constructs dissolve. The Bardo of Dharmata, where consciousness encounters pure awareness. The text describes visions and experiences representing our own psychological potentials and karmic patterns. The Bardo of becoming, where consciousness moves toward rebirth. A dreamlike state where future experience is shaped by both past patterns and present responses. Why should you care about understanding these states? Because recognizing these transitions gives you power over your experience. Most suffering comes from not recognizing the temporary nature of these states. We mistake passing experiences for permanent reality. This wisdom wasn't created to stay hidden in monasteries. It was deliberately preserved to help people like us navigate life's transitions with awareness. Let me tell you how this manual came to be. The Tibetan Book of the Dead was composed by the legendary master Padmasambhava in the 8th century during Buddhism's earliest days in Tibet. But here's the fascinating part. He didn't publish it. He deliberately hid it as a terma or treasure text, buried in caves, knowing it would be discovered centuries later when humanity needed it most. It remained hidden for over 500 years until a Tibetan mystic named Karma Lingpa discovered it while exploring sacred caves in central Tibet. This wasn't accidental. It was a time capsule meant for future generations facing different challenges. Now let's discover how to actually use this wisdom in your daily life. Let me share a simple method I call R.E.S.T, R-E.S.T, that distills these ancient teachings into something you can use today. R. Recognize the state you're in. E. Embrace the experience without resistance. S. See through its temporary nature. T. Transform by shifting your perspective. Let's practice this right now with a common experience, anxiety before a presentation. First, recognize this is anxiety arising, just name it clearly. Nervous thoughts appearing, racing heart happening. Next, embrace. Instead of fighting the feelings, allow the sensations, racing heart, tight chest. No judgment. This isn't about liking the experience, just not wasting energy fighting it. Then, see through. Notice this state arose from specific conditions and will pass when they change. It's not who you are. It's a temporary Bardo state flowing through your awareness. Finally, transform. Shift your attention to the awareness that notices these feelings, rather than being consumed by them. You're not the anxiety, you're the knowing of it. I've used this practice in my own life during intense transition periods. I remember during a particularly difficult breakup, I was caught in what seemed like endless grief. Every morning I'd wake up with a heaviness that followed me throughout the day. What changed everything was recognizing this as a Bardo state, temporary, transitional, not my fundamental identity. This recognition created space between me and grief, allowing me to work with it rather than be consumed by it. Let's try another example, anger during a traffic jam. Recognize anger arising, frustration happening. Embrace, feel the heat in your face, the tightness in your body. Don't suppress it or act it out. See through. Notice how this state was triggered by specific conditions and will change. 5 minutes ago you weren't angry. 5 minutes from now, you might not be either. Transform. Rest is the awareness that notices the anger rather than becoming the anger. You contain the experience without being defined by it. This simple practice creates a crucial gap between you and your experience. The difference between being swept away by a river and standing on the bank, watching it flow. The Bardos aren't just ancient philosophy, they're happening in your life right now. That moment between sleeping and waking, the transition between jobs or relationships, the space between one thought and the next. The Bardo Thödol teaches that all states are temporary transitions. Next time you're dealing with pain or difficulty, remind yourself, this too is a Bardo, a temporary state that will pass. Modern science has begun validating many of the Bardo Thödol's core insights in surprising ways. Neuroscience research confirms what Tibetan Buddhists understood centuries ago. Consciousness exists in distinct transitional states that we can learn to navigate. Studies from the Center for Healthy Minds at the University of Wisconsin have documented how long-term meditators develop measurable changes in brain function, precisely what the Bardo Thödol predicts. These practitioners can consciously enter and navigate different states of consciousness, moving from beta to alpha to theta brainwave states with remarkable control. Carl Jung was among the first Western psychologists to recognize the significance of this text. In 1935, he wrote a psychological commentary on it. Seeing the peaceful and wrathful deities, described not as external gods, but as manifestations of our own mind. Jung didn't just theorize about these concepts, he applied them in therapy, helping patients navigate what he called liminal spaces between conscious and unconscious awareness. The latest research on psychedelic therapy shows similar patterns. Temporary ego dissolution, revealing profound psychological insights. Scientists like Roland Griffiths at Johns Hopkins have documented how psilocybin sessions create experiences remarkably similar to those described in the Bardo Thödol. Today's mindfulness movement owes a tremendous debt to these Bardo teachings. When people use meditation apps or practice mindfulness, they're often using simplified versions of the same awareness techniques described in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, observing thoughts and emotions without being consumed by them. The essential process across all these modalities is the same: recognizing the constructed nature of experience and accessing a more fundamental awareness. That's the true power of these teachings. They work regardless of your belief system. The Bardo Thödol isn't asking you to adopt any specific religious view. It's describing the universal architecture of consciousness itself. A map that works whether you're a Buddhist monk, a neuroscientist, or someone simply trying to navigate life's challenges. The Tibetan Book of the Dead didn't stay hidden in monasteries. It burst into Western consciousness and sparked a cultural revolution. In 1964, Timothy Leary, Ralph Metzner, and Richard Alpert published The Psychedelic Experience, adapting the Bardo Thödol as a guide for psychedelic journeys. This book became the handbook for the 1960s counterculture movement, profoundly influencing how people approached consciousness exploration. What's remarkable is how this ancient wisdom found its way into popular music. John Lennon used lines directly from The Psychedelic Experience in the Beatles' song Tomorrow Never Knows, opening with lyrics inspired by the Bardo Thödol's instructions for consciousness transition. This wasn't just artistic borrowing. It was an attempt to translate profound spiritual insight into popular culture. The influence extended into film as well. Gaspar Noé's Enter the Void follows the consciousness of a character after death, using first-person perspective and hallucination sequences that directly mirror the Bardo states described in the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Even The Matrix incorporates elements of these teachings. Neo's journey can be interpreted as moving through different levels of consciousness, with the red pill initiating his Bardo-like transition between perceived realities. In modern psychology and therapy, these concepts have found practical applications. Stanislav Grof's work in transpersonal psychology draws heavily on Bardo concepts, using them to understand both ordinary and non-ordinary states of consciousness. Sogyal Rinpoche's modern interpretation, the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, brought these teachings to mainstream Western audiences in the 1990s. It sold over 3 million copies worldwide and is used in palliative care settings to help people approach death with greater awareness. Few spiritual texts have had such profound impact across so many dimensions of culture, but the most important question remains: how can this ancient wisdom transform your own experience? We've explored the practical applications of the Bardo Thödol, but its deepest teaching addresses humanity's greatest fear: death itself. The text offers a profound perspective shift. What if death isn't an ending but a transition? What if the awareness witnessing your life continues beyond physical death? Modern near-death experience research suggests consciousness may indeed persist when brain activity ceases, paralleling what the Bardo Thödol described centuries ago. But even if you don't believe in literal afterlife states, the symbolic wisdom remains powerful. By confronting death directly, we dissolve the unconscious fear driving much of our behavior. Think about it. How many decisions do you make from fear rather than freedom? How often have you stayed in situations that no longer serve you because you were afraid of the alternative? The Bardo Thödol teaches that by accepting impermanence fully, we paradoxically gain true freedom in life. Throughout history, practitioners who deeply internalized these teachings reported profound transformations. The 11th century yogi Milarepa described it as recognizing death as a doorway rather than an end, completely liberating him from fear. So how do we actually use this wisdom? By regularly contemplating life's impermanence, not in a morbid way, but as a reminder of what truly matters. By recognizing that everything you experience, including your sense of self, is in constant transition. And here's the mind-bending twist that changes everything. By fully confronting and accepting impermanence and death, we discover something that was there all along, an awareness that isn't born and doesn't die. When you stop identifying exclusively with your body, thoughts, and emotions, you discover something much more vast and stable beneath those changing appearances. You're not being dragged around by every thought or emotion anymore. This recognition doesn't just transform how you face death, it revolutionizes how you experience every single moment of life. Challenges that once seemed overwhelming become workable. Transitions that were terrifying become opportunities. Even painful emotions become doorways to deeper awareness. The Buddha himself said that those who understand death are freed from it. The ultimate paradox of the Tibetan Book of the Dead is that by deeply accepting impermanence and death, we find the deathless awareness that was our true nature all along. For the next 7 days, I challenge you to practice the R.E.S.T method for just 5 minutes each morning. Notice what arises in your experience and move through the 4 steps. Recognize what's happening. Embrace without resistance. See through its temporary nature. Transform your relationship to it. Then throughout your day, watch for Bardo moments, those transitions between states. When you notice one, pause briefly and apply the process. Keep a small journal of your Bardo experiences. Notice which states you got caught in and which ones you navigated with awareness. Appreciate your successes and learn from the challenging moments. Remember, sleep itself is a Bardo state. As you drift off tonight, maintain a gentle awareness of the transition from waking to dreaming consciousness. Many practitioners report that this simple practice transforms their sleep quality and even leads to lucid dreaming. How do you know if these practices are working? Look for these signs of progress. You'll notice thoughts and emotions arising before they completely take over. You'll recover more quickly from challenging situations. You'll feel less overwhelmed by transitions and changes. You'll experience more moments of genuine peace. Of course, you'll face obstacles. The main one is simply forgetting to practice. That's why I recommend visible reminders or partnering with a friend. Another challenge is expecting instant results. Remember, Tibetan practitioners spend years mastering these techniques. Be patient with yourself and celebrate small victories. I'd love to hear about your experiences in the comments below. What Bardos are you currently navigating? Which techniques have been most helpful? Remember, every challenge contains the seed of awakening. Every transition is an opportunity for greater awareness, and death itself holds potential for profound liberation. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the Bardo Thödol. Until next time, stay curious and stay aware.